So, this talk is about institutional abuse of the disabled, sexual abuse in particular. This is my anecdotal account, and it's also about how I found my mother's rapist / father. These are a couple of the headlines about the case itself. It made headlines because I recently filed a lawsuit, so it became kind of public knowledge at that point. So, if I didn't say it already, Maggie Cruz is my name. I'm 37, I'm married, I have 6 children, and I grew up in Rochester, New York. I was raised by my mother's parents. She is developmentally disabled, severely developmentally disabled, and she was abused while living in a state facility. So I grew up in Rochester, New York, and I had a very structured, God-centered upbringing. My grandparents were devout Christians. We attended a Spanish-speaking Pentecostal church. I was there Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. For K through 8, I attended a small private school, and I was bused to the suburbs from the city to go there. I did that until I was in 9th grade. And then I attended a local city public school. I think pretty typical to most people, around me. It's not uncommon to see kids that are raised by their grandparents. That's pretty common. But what I was hiding was much different than most people knew. So on most Sundays after church, we would pick up my mother from her group home, and we would bring her home for the rest of the day. And our visits usually were her pacing back and forth, and occasionally she would stop to read or to look at a magazine, to flip through a magazine, or to flip through a phone book. And then my grandmother would make her favorite meal, which is like hot dogs, and she would eat that, and nobody would want to eat with her because she was a pilferer, so she would steal people's food. So, you have to be cautious with that. She has pica, so she will eat or drink anything that looks like food. And then because she was not potty trained, we'd have to freshen her, and we would take her back. She lived about 20 minutes away from our city home. I found out that I was conceived from rape about the age of 8, and I was told by my grandmother and my aunt. They were trying to control how I would find out. They were afraid that maybe some other family members might tell me or something like that. I want to give some statistics about sexual abuse of the disabled. 90% of people with developmental disabilities will experience sexual assault at some point in their life, according to the University of Michigan, which is a very high percentage. Approximately 80% of women and 30% of men with developmental disabilities have been sexually assaulted. Half of these women have been assaulted more than 10 times. That's really high. And that just goes to show how these people are not being protected. And because a lot of these people live in institutions as well. This is my mother, a year after giving birth to me. So that's me. You can see my grandfather holding me on her lap there. So some background on, I'm going to call her IC to protect her identity. IC is my mother. So her condition came as a result of a sickness that she had at age 3. She is nonverbal, but she does make sounds. She could not be bathroom trained, though they tried for years. She does not feed herself well, but she can drink out of a sippy cup. For most of her life, she walked independently and enjoyed constant motion, but in recent years has become wheelchair bound, but this has nothing to do with her mental disability. And she enjoys flipping through large books and magazines. She has an assessed IQ of less than 20 and has been classified as having profound mental retardation. She was born in Puerto Rico and moved to the States as a baby. She is the oldest of 5 children. She was first institutionalized at the age of 10 in Newark, New York. In 1976, she was 22 when she first came from NBC to then MDC, which is Monroe Developmental. In May of 1985, she was discovered to be 5 months pregnant. While living at MDC, it would be 8 years before she would be moved to a smaller private facility. So this is Monroe Developmental in Brighton, New York. It was a state-run facility. So you have the entity that ran this facility because it was closed in, I believe, 2013. So it doesn't house people anymore. But at one point, this was a huge facility. It would have been like a college campus, basically. And I remember going there as a child, and it was very big and intimidating. It's just the front of the building, but like a college campus, you can drive all the way around. And wherever you walk in, there were units all over the place, with people housed in different units according to their level of disability. Oh, but the entity that runs this is OPWDD, that would be the state. All right, so before I get into how I began uncovering the truth, I want to explain why I wanted to search in the first place. So growing up, there were several times that I asked key people in my life what they remembered about my birth and the events that led to it. And one of the things that many of my family members said was that MDC had promised my family an investigation and that they didn't know what had come of any investigation. I wanted to find out what really happened, and so that's why I began investigating. I suspected that the crime had never been investigated. I suspected that it had never been reported, but I couldn't be sure. And also, there was a man named John Horace. He's a known rapist in upstate New York. I had heard an aunt of mine say that because he committed a crime around the same time as my mother's crime, and actually on the same road, that building that you saw, there was another facility up the street, a nursing home, and he committed a crime there where he raped a comatose woman. She was comatose, and she became impregnated, and this was national headlines. So my aunt had mentioned that they suspected that it was possible that he was responsible for the rape of my mother. So in the back of my mind, as I began to investigate, I had him, I thought for sure, like, he's an African-American man. I thought it was possible that he could be my father. In that case, the woman ended up passing away after she gave birth, and her family sued the state, and they won. Flip to more present future, or more present past. So there was right after I got married, so in 2013, I took a trip to Rochester, New York to visit family, and I heard on a news blast that man, John Horace, was being paroled from prison. When I heard this, I told my husband, I think it's possible that he could be my father. And so this began, like, the actual thinking, like, maybe I should investigate him in particular to find out if he could be my father. But I didn't know how that was possible. I just knew that I thought that maybe he could be my father. So at that time, I was pregnant with my first child. And I remember specifically praying and asking God to, if it's possible, please please help me to find who my father is. I was, pregnant with my first child, and I thought it'd be nice to know who my father is. It'd be nice to know when I look at my children, where they get certain traits from. And so I prayed and I said, Lord, I know that this seems impossible, but you are a God that makes the impossible possible. And so I distinctly remember that day, but I didn't do anything then. It was several years before we actually began searching. So it began by 2019. I decided to investigate the circumstances of my birth, so I emailed someone in charge of records from OPWDD, and I requested my mother's documents from 1985 until 1987. I figured that would give me a window of a year before she was impregnated and a year after my birth to see, I wanted to see what was going on during that period. So they gave me all types of records. They gave me medical records, they gave me social worker records, they gave me like personal direct care notes and things like that. While I waited for those records, I did two FOIL requests, one to the Rochester Police Department. Rochester is the greater area. She was raped in Brighton, where she lived, but Rochester is the greater surrounding area, so I did a FOIL there. Maybe they would have reported it to the bigger cities. And I did a FOIL in Brighton, New York, which was the actual town. That was in 2019. And what I found out was that the facility had never reported to either police department. There was a detective at the Brighton Police Department who felt for my story, and he kept in contact with me after that. After this, I contacted the DA's office in Monroe County. I told him that I thought that Horace could be my mother's rapist, and I asked if they could revive the case due to new evidence. But they informed me that the statute of limitations had expired and that they couldn't do that. And they told me my best case scenario was to do a civil case, and I would not be able to actually go after him. But I had learned from other rape cases that new DNA can pause the statute of limitations, and so I didn't just go based on what they said. I thought, like, maybe there's a way I can get DNA. The man is still alive. John Horace is still alive, and he's getting paroled. Maybe there's a way that I can get his DNA. And so, my husband, he went on Facebook, and he got in contact with a relative of John Horace. He found a cousin of his, and I emailed her and said, this is the situation. I think that your cousin could be my father. They're well aware of his charges and his history, and so she was willing to help me, and she put me in contact with John Horace's son. And he was very kind to me and very sympathetic, and he said he would agree to do a DNA test. And so my husband and I, we set it up. We had him in Rochester, New York. We had him go and go take a DNA test, but he never showed up. So because of that, I kind of let that go. But at this time, I began working with an attorney, and he wanted to help me, but he couldn't really figure out how to do it, because at this time, the statute of limitations has run. We would have to find something like fraud committed by the state or something that would toll the statute of limitations. And he wasn't really able to figure out how to do that. Meanwhile, while this is going on, I'm still waiting for these records from OPWDD because they were not trying to give me those records. It took 5 months to get them, and I only got them because the detective who decided to stay in contact with me, he contacted them and let them know that it was illegal to hold the records, and so they finally did give me the records. That was August of 2019, I finally got them. So made an official, that detective, he invited me to Rochester, New York to make an official police report since it had never been made. I made that police report in February of 2019, 33 years after her rape. Finally was, made aware that she had been raped. I took a DNA test in 9 of 2019. And after that, that's when things began to get interesting. So I thought that John Horace was my father still. I took the DNA test. It was an ancestry DNA test that you mail in. And I thought for sure it's just gonna say Horace. I literally didn't care about anything else on my DNA. I didn't care to see any name on my mom's side. I was just focused on what it would say on my father's side. And it did not say Horace. I didn't know any of the names on my father's side. Nothing looks familiar. And so I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do. So I looked, Ancestry gives you, your closest relatives, on your mother's side and your father's side. So I took the closest relative on my father's side, which was a male who it said was my second cousin. And I figured, well, that must mean that my father would be this man's uncle or his cousin. And so I went on Facebook and I found the name of the man who had said was my closest relative. I began searching his page for family members. I was looking for somebody who might be his uncle, somebody who might be his cousin, something like that, but I wasn't finding much information on his page. And so I found many other relatives, but I wasn't finding the man I thought was my father. Until my husband, he went outside of Facebook and he did a Google search and he ended up finding a family reunion page. And he showed me a picture. This was I don't want to say the man's name, but that family's family reunion. And he showed me a picture. He's like, look at this picture of this man with this woman. And it wasn't even the man. It wasn't even the man who made me say like, hey, he looks like me. It was his daughter. His daughter was standing next to him and she looked, I'm sorry, this mic keeps going in and out. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. The picture of the woman, it looked like me. She looked like a dark-skinned me. And I was like, no, that's him. That's him. I know that's him. And so after that, I sent the picture and I sent his name to that same detective in Brighton, New York. And just based on that alone, he was like, well, send me a picture of your mother, an old picture of your mother from the time when she would have been abused, and I'm gonna go knock on this man's door. So I'm like, oh, okay. I'm really not thinking he's serious. Like, he has no, first of all, the police department had told him to leave it alone. They had said, this is a dead case, let it go. But he was just so, I know that the Lord put it in his heart to help me. So he goes and he knocks on the man's door and he says to him, are you the JB who worked at NBC in 1984, 1985? I know that God gave him these words because I don't even know where he got that from. He had no information on this man, other than I had said to him, we did a search, and this man seems to have lived in Rochester, New York at the time of the rape. And based on my Facebook search, the rest of his family lived in North Carolina, something like that, Virginia, North Carolina. So I thought it was possible, but this police officer didn't have any information on this man. But he said to him, are you the man who worked there at NBC from 1984 to 1985? And the man said yes. He said, okay, he showed him the picture of my mother. He said, does she look familiar? And he said, yes. I was a direct care worker for her. And he said, did you have a relationship with her? And he said, not that I'm aware of, or not that I recall. And he said, oh, okay. Do you recall that she became pregnant? And he said, yes, I remember. There was something about the family, something like that, something yada yada, he said. And then the police officer asked him if he'd be willing to get his DNA. He said he didn't want to be railroaded by old DNA. And the officer said, oh no, it's not old DNA. It'll be your new DNA, and it'll be your potential daughter's DNA. And he said, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I'll get back to you. I'm going to seek counsel, something like that. So after this happened, and I didn't even know it had happened, he calls me and he says, I'm 100%, that's your dad. And, you know, yep. It's okay. Sorry. It's okay.
Look at this.
Okay, so the next thing I want to get into is, so now I know that he's my father, and I've got a huge stack of documents that they have given me from OPWDD, but it's, like I said, it's random. It's documents, and it's terribly photocopied. I can barely read most of the stuff that's on these papers. But now I've got his name, and I'm intent to find that man's name in these documents. And I remember the day I told my husband, I'm gonna go sit down, I'm gonna find his name in these documents. And I sat down in a Starbucks coffee shop in a Target, and I sat there till I found his name in those documents. He had been a direct care worker for my mother. And, I mean, we can skip to the third note there. I found his actual handwritten notes about my mother, and one of them said, I see likes men of color. If I didn't make it clear yet, my mother has the mental capacity of a 1.5-year-old. She doesn't have the capacity to know what liking, that type of sexual anything. This is like you're talking about a child, okay? This type of talk was going on in the documents, and there's no reprimanding, there's no, I see it in the documents, and it's like not even a big deal. Not even a big deal. So, and there were more from him. And the crazy thing is that the ones that were signed JP, which are his initials, they were all around the same time. And they were all within the window of conception. So, I also found other notes that were pretty damning for the facility. Because current day, the facility is telling me that they don't know anything about an investigation, but I found the notes that they had said, because there were psych notes, so I'm seeing psych notes and I'm seeing social worker notes. The social worker notes show you the interaction between my family and the facility, because you've got the social worker like, tell the family this, relate this to the family. One of the things the social workers had said to relate to the family was that there was an investigation and that they would be narrowing down events, suspects, and that they would use DNA. This is what they promised my family, okay? And nothing ever came of this. Nothing ever came of this. No narrowing of suspects, nothing like that. And as you found out, they did not even report it to the police. I found a series of notes that showed a series of injuries, including bruises, cuts, and even a bite mark to my mother's breast. And this was all leading up to her pregnancy, even after some were even after her pregnancy. And then the other thing I noticed in the notes were that they didn't seem to care very much about her being pregnant at all. The way that they spoke was as if she deserved it because, you know, she was out there being promiscuous and flaunting herself. They used words like fondling, groping, that these were things that she was doing to other clients. Again, if a child touches you, that is not fondling. That is just an unaware child, you know, and you don't take advantage of that just because of that. And you don't make someone feel like it's their fault because of that. So, they were very desperate in the notes to give my mother a tubal ligation, which would have been tying her tubes because, of course, she can't be trusted to not get pregnant. So she needs a tubal ligation. And then the notes were saying, like, ask the family if they will go to court to agree to the tubal ligation, and this and that. Eventually, that didn't work. So then they just said, okay, we'll put her on birth control, which I found out later is something that happens very commonly in institutions, that they, instead of trying to stop the rape or the abuse that goes on, they put the women on birth control. Yes. So right after they found out she was pregnant, they called a meeting with my family to let them know she was pregnant. And in that meeting, of course, they brought up abortion because, you know, of course, let's get rid of the evidence of a crime, because if they would have aborted me, there would literally be no evidence. They didn't report it. They didn't even report it, like, even within the institution, they didn't do the bare minimum to report what had happened. And so my grandparents, being devout Christians, they said no. And my grandparents told me many times that we said we didn't care how you would come out, because they were telling my grandparents, well, you know that she'll be disabled. You know that she will probably be mentally handicapped also. But my grandparents said that they didn't care. They would, you know, love me anyway, they would take me anyway, and they didn't want an abortion. And so, okay, so at this time that I found all this information, I was working with a lawyer at the time, but like I said, he wasn't sure how to help me. And so we ended up finding another attorney. My husband ended up saying, you know, we're like, we don't think that this is going anywhere. You know, we don't think that he really can do what we need him to do. And so he looked for another attorney, a feminist attorney, and she was very interested in the case. She wanted to take it, but she made me sign a contract that was contingent upon something called the Adult Survivors Act. At that time, so this was I believe this was in 2020. Yes, in 2020. And the Adult Survivors Act, if anybody's aware of the Child Victims Act, it's a law that is signed into effect. It gives a 1-year window of time in which rapes that occurred in the past you could sue based on those rapes now, but you only had a 1-year window. So in 2020, I signed up for contingent on that law passing, and it took 2 years, but in May of 2022, that law did pass. And in March 6th of 2023, I was able to file a lawsuit against OPWDD on behalf of my mother. So. I just want to end this with, you know, I'm very grateful to have the life that I have, even though there were people who tried to keep me from literally not having it. I feel that I know that the story was given to me, and so it's my obligation to tell it. And so, thank you very much for everybody for listening. And that's it, and I just want to open up if anybody has questions. Yes, oh, sorry. Yes, so, at the very beginning, when my grandparents found out about the rape, my grandparents, they were trying to pursue a lawsuit right at the time that it happened. Like I said, my grandparents were Spanish speaking, they were newly from Puerto Rico, and they didn't know very much about their rights. And yes, my grandparents had heard that they were trying to accuse my grandfather of potentially being a suspect. Not just my grandfather, actually. They were trying to say that it could have been any male from my family, because she, like I said, every Sunday we would pick her up, and so they just, tried to lessen the blame on themselves and say maybe it was somebody else. But that was never founded in any way. But it was enough to scare my grandparents and make them just want to be like private about it and not sue.
When did they close the facility and why?
I believe they closed it in it's technically still open. It's still there. I went there in 2019, I picked up the records. So it's there and it's functioning, but it's not functioning as a residential group home any longer. Oh yes, so good question about why it was closed. Well, this place has been plagued with controversy. I mean, they've had people die there from maltreatment. My current lawyers discovered that just from the time that it opened, which was maybe 5 years before my mom entered there, from the time that it opened to the time that she was found to be pregnant, they had like at least 10 cases where young boys being sodomized and abused, people being left out in the sun and dying. It was just a slew of cases. So, and that was just in like a 10-year window. So I can only imagine how many cases that they've racked up over the years. So I'm pretty sure that that's also why they closed this facility.
What's the status of your father?
Hmm?
Is there a criminal investigation going on now?
So I can't pursue a criminal investigation because of the statute of limitations. In order for him to be prosecuted, and this is why I allow his name to be out there, even though I'm not suing him, I'm not suing him even civilly, but his name is out there and it's in the records. So if you look up the court records, you'll see his name is in there. But I've done that so that somebody else might know that he's done something. He may have done something within, a shorter span, more recent, and somebody might be able to get him prosecuted, criminally. But I personally can't
Well,
do
I
it.
noticed you mentioned the series of injuries, bruises, etc. So that sounds like she was messed with more than one time.
Oh, yeah.
By
And
the
you
same
saw in
person or
the,
somebody different.
yes. So, like I showed in this statistic right here, it's common that if a woman is being sexually assaulted, that she's been assaulted more than 10 times. I believe that those series of injuries shows that she was one of the women that was probably being abused, who knows, for years. She stayed in that facility for 8 years after she gave birth. And I told you that they were very adamant about putting her on birth control, and it could have continued.
That is so insane. So was she ever put on birth control, actually?
Yeah, they did.
So they did put her
They
on
put her
birth
on
control
control.
without the parents who
I think my grandparents might have consented.
might have consented to it.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, they probably were just concerned, for her, Like I said, what they told the facility, because they were very unhappy with her being there, that they wanted her moved. And it took them 8 years to move her.
Did you ever get the DNA test to prove that he was your father? Or he never
Oh,
was?
yes. Yes, so when I say that I took an ancestry DNA test, yes, I found out that he was my father. It doesn't say, I didn't get anything that says his name, but I was able to find him based on his relatives' DNA. Unfortunately, I guess that's not enough to, you know what's the really sad part is that even if I wanted to have them revive this case against this man, it was never reported to the police. So what am I reviving? It would be like me just reporting a case that is almost 40 years old at this point.
Wow.
Yes. This is why I'm doing the civil lawsuit against the state. A lot of people had asked me, well, why don't you focus on the man? Why are you going after the state? Well, the state made so many errors, and I think it was intentional, not just errors, but intentional fraud to keep my family from being able to sue, to keep my family from getting justice. And that's why there's no way, if I can, I'm gonna try to hold them accountable for that.
Yes.
So when you said that mom, she's not aware, basically, of all the things that happened.
My mother?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say what she's aware of. There was definitely behavioral changes that were seen in her after the rapes, you know. For one thing, in the notes it said that she seemed to have like some kind of I don't know if it was a fear or excitement or something that would happen when she was around black men. And it wasn't just him who had said it in the notes. I saw other people mentioning it in the notes as well. And, you know, so something definitely happened. She definitely went through some kind of a trauma. She can't speak about it, you know, but I'll never know. Is that it? Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you guys listening to my story.
Is there anything you can do that help your case or whatever?
No, I think honestly just sharing the story is doing a good job, you know, putting it out there.
Are you willing to be on more platforms?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
I'm definitely willing to talk about it more. I realize that people are so unaware. They're so unaware. They put people in institutions and they don't check on them and they don't know how like scary it really is in institutions, you know, especially if you don't have the capacity to defend yourself, you know, to even tell somebody that something is happening.
You know, it's funny, as you were telling your story, I recall being a child, and I have an aunt who's deaf, hearing impaired, and then I had another cousin who was also, she was mentally impaired, and she was disabled. And I recall hearing it throughout the chat of the family that how some of the family members had been molesting her. And it just came to my memory as I'm sitting here, like I just had some type of war empathy. Like, so it's not just the facility.
Right.
It's in your own.
Oh, yes,
You know, that stuff happens.
yes.
It's insane.
I mean, some of the stories that I heard of things that were happening in the facilities, I mean, they were just so unbelievable, like, you know, boys being dragged out of their bed in the middle of the night, brought into like a corridor where all the employees could see, and, you know, like having a train run, like, it's, I mean, unbelievable.
It's crazy.
You wouldn't think that this is happening where they're taking care of people.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you for coming.